Hello, I'm Craig DeRoche, CEO of Family Policy Alliance. The battle for family continues in America. We know that the evil one doesn't take a week off, but we also know that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ does not take a moment off, and that we also know the end of the story, that we're going to win. Recently, in the battle though for the family, we've been experiencing some wins, and some of these wins come from Indiana, and Indiana has been putting up wins for the family for generations. But these are particularly interesting. The Indiana Family Institute is one of our 40 state policy groups. And Josh Hershberger, the director of the Church Ambassador Network there, and the general counsel, for those of you who don't know what that means, general counsel means top lawyer for the shop. Indiana Family Institute. He's going to join us from Hanover, Indiana, where he and his wife and his children live, and he serves in church leadership. Josh, it's a privilege to have you with us here today to talk about what's going on for families.
It's great to be back on, Craig. Always good to see you. And for the good folks in Florida, I was down there recently, and they like to refer to it as the free state of Florida. Indiana doesn't quite have that cliche yet, but we're coming. We want Indiana to be a light to the nation, and we have a great governor. Our new lieutenant governor is actually a pastor and a strong conservative. So we've got a lot of great things going on here in the Hoosier State, and I'm happy to update about a few today.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to jump into that. And being a Michigan guy, I don't want you to do too good down there in Indiana, but we want you to do
Yeah.
okay, especially with basketball. But back to the serious stuff. You guys did a really serious thing in 2024 here. You passed the first ever age verification law in Indiana to prevent children from viewing explicit adult content online. Now, people would say, oh, that's not controversial. Yes, it is. Dan Quayle was a young junior senator from Indiana, and he became vice president in the late 80s. And he said, we need to protect kids from pornography. And people said, the old fuddy-duddy, and they made fun of him and they ridiculed him, folks. Now, all these years later, guess what's leading the way? Indiana, restoring that. What happened? How does that happen? We're in a state, I know we've had a generation grow up since then, but explain to us what you guys have done to be successful there in protecting children.
Yeah, so age verification is one of those, when I talk to pastors about it, so why weren't we doing this before? But you have the free speech argument. And in fact, if folks listening remember, when this case, came before the Supreme Court, the Association of Pornographers called themselves the Free Speech Coalition. All right. And so that's the argument they've been making. It's our free speech right. And as Christians, we come back and say, not for our 10-year-olds, it's not. We know how damaging it is for 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds to access this material, and how it rewires their brain. It's just not good for them. We know from Scripture that parents have the right and responsibility to raise their children, the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to protect them. And so Joanna King, she's not talked a lot about around the country, but just this fiery state representative, fairly new in the legislature, and she took this up as her cause. And she came in with all of the data showing how damaging it is, and saying, look, if you're going to be accessing this stuff, you need to prove that you're of age, that you're over 18. And for those groups like Pornhub, hey, you're going to have that age verification before you allow someone to use your service. And so that passed. And I saw Joanna actually last year, the same day that the Seventh Circuit upheld that law. And she was just grinning ear to ear. And so we have these causes, but you also see the people. This just strong Christian woman from northern Indiana, the Shipshewana area, where there's a lot of Amish. And so she came into legislature and championed that. Now we're following up on that this year, because I will tell you, one of the more frustrating things that I've handled as an attorney is when we have our supporters call us up and say, hey, there's going to be a government-sponsored drag show down the road, and they're inviting young kids to come to this sexually explicit show, and what can we do? And because of some of the case law, unless we can show that group has actually exposed, and I don't know, we're just talking about brass tacks here, and this is difficult stuff, but unless they're showing a genital, or there's just some obscenity, it's very hard to get in front of that and shut something down. And so what we've done this session, it's Senate Bill 326. there's now a provision that would say, hey, government cannot sponsor any sort of obscene performance. And it's right along the lines of you can't, we're not going to allow children to access pornography. We're going to protect young minds and young hearts. That question, what price can you put on innocence? And we're glad to say that that is actually kind of passed through up to second reading on the House side. And I tell you, it's crazy when you start talking about
I got an
this.
amendment for you on that one, Josh.
Okay.
I got an amendment. You should
Yeah,
broaden that one. Broaden that one to include blackface demonstrations and other mocking of people's race, creed, or origin. And then let's see how the other side thinks it's funny to use state resources to advocate hate and division and the denial. I love the way you're doing that, Josh. What you're doing. They're denying women their civil rights, and they're trying to add like their subtraction of civil rights is an addition in some, I don't know, Marvel multiverse or something like that. But people are aware that in Indiana that they're trying to subtract your girls' rights, their civil rights, and you're trying to protect them. I absolutely love your approach here. So how can we be helping you? What should folks in Indiana be looking for? How to work with Indiana Family Institute? Because what you do is similar to what your peers in their states do, right? With how FPCs work.
Sure. So certainly these causes, like SB 326, that's just common sense. Hey, we want to protect our children. You can have a right to expression, but that's not an obscene performance in front of a child. Certainly girls' sports, and we are now working on protecting girls' sports all the way up through to the college level, and that's really important in Indiana because the NCAA is here. And it's remarkable how those like Riley Gaines and others, these just courageous young women, have changed the narrative, and that the NCAA even has been backing off on this, and I think supporting common sense. So some ways that folks can certainly support us and help us is if you're an Indiana resident, contacting your legislator about 326, and then I want to dovetail into a really important bill, and that has to do with parental rights. That's what
I was going to get to. That's Senate Bill. Yeah. Is that 143?
That's correct. Yes.
So
it's amazing, Greg, that you're tracking those all over the country. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this one, and this is what we wanted to have you talk about, folks. We're with Josh Hershberger. He's the general counsel, and he's also the Church Ambassador Network for the Indiana Family Institute. And we're talking about just the amazing success that is moving forward for families in Indiana, where they're kind of pioneering the most, I guess, the most impactful things that you should want done in your state if you're a parent. One of them that they call strengthening parental rights in Indiana passed through the Indiana Senate on Monday, 44-5. Now, does that mean it was bipartisan, or does that mean that we're actually families and family values are starting to get traction and becoming politically popular again? Tell us what the bill is and tell us why it was so successful, Josh.
Right. So we know from case law and also I think just good old common sense that the right of parents to raise their children is the oldest and most fundamental liberty interest. If you have the right to free speech, if you have the right to free exercise of religion, but you don't have the right to raise your children according to those beliefs, all the rest of these rights really do ring hollow. And despite that fact, many listeners might be surprised that when it comes to state law and when it comes to things like the child welfare state, or when it comes to public schools withholding information from parents, when you have a teenager that decides to transition to it, say, refer to a boy wants to be referred to as a girl, that parental rights have been just kind of cast aside. They've just been run right through. So our goal with SB 143 is very simple. It is that in our state law, we want to make sure that parental rights are treated just like free speech, just like the free exercise of religion, our most sacred rights. We believe that our parental rights should be treated in that fashion. And that means if the government is going to come against a parent, then they have to pass what is called the strict scrutiny standard. Legally, that means that the state has to have a compelling interest, an interest of the absolute highest order, and it must do so in a very narrowly tailored means.
You're not upset about the power of government for anything. Social Security doesn't bother you, our wars, things like that. There's nothing can get after you as to what our government can do. Imagine this. Our government for more than 20 years, I know this because when I was in the legislature, they were taking kids away in Michigan for having a messy house, subjectively, like state union, child and family service workers having the power to remove children from the household over things they don't agree with. Things like whether or not the child learns some radical religion of LGBTQ at school and announces that they're going to transition the pronouns and try to postulate their parents into this school religion when they get home from school. Parents actually lost their kid in Indiana for doing that, where the school got to decide what the religion of that household was. And when the parents wouldn't comply with calling their kids a different gender, they removed the kid from the parents' custody. Is that true?
Yes, and so let me pivot from the committee hearing and come back to that. But
Yeah.
for the family, the Mary and Jeremy Cox, and this I would say is every Christian parent's worst nightmare. Their son came to them, declared himself to be a girl. They loved their child. They're providing every physical, mental health, medical, educational need for the child. Tried to meet him in the middle, referring to him using kind of a nickname. And anyone that's parented teenagers knows this is a difficult time of life, trying to navigate that. But the state came in and treated that refusal to affirm this transgender ideology. That they just said, hey, we're not going to use these preferred names and pronouns because it's not true. And we know that it's best to raise our child according to his biological sex. That is supported by our faith, that's supported by our research. All of this is now up in front of the Supreme Court in Scrimeti that's been so thoroughly documented. But here's what DCS argued at the initial hearing. This is the exact quote. And just how objective is this? Here's the quote. We just feel that she, now this is a biological male, that she should be in a home where she is accepted for who she is, period. The court removed that child, barred the parents from speaking about their faith, and placed him in a home chosen because that home would affirm his transgender ideology. We know now that is part of a growing legal strategy in places like Washington, in California, and now Minnesota. The state can take emergency jurisdiction of a child if parents are not providing quote unquote gender affirming care. So this is, to me, there's nothing that keeps me up at night like that. I mean, this is the woods are on fire. The alarm bells are ringing. So we mentioned SB 143. Well, a part of this effort is in Indiana law. We appealed that case to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we were not able to get relief for the family. So we came back to fix it legislatively. And our law, it's now passed through Senate committee, and we'll head to the full Senate. And it simply says that raising and referring to your child according to their biological sex is not abuse or neglect, period. So it's a fairly simple piece of legislation. And by the way, you mentioned getting bipartisan support. One of the individuals that actually voted for this particular amendment, saying referring to raising to your child according to the biological sex is not abuse, is actually very strongly identifies as LGBTQ, very progressive in his ideology, and yet he voted for this. And so there's a lot of unlikely allies that we're seeing develop in this space. But that is the issue that we saw as the woods are on fire. We have to fix this. And I did work with the Heritage Foundation, in developing a model bill. It's called the Defining Abuse Child Protection Act. And listeners could just Google that, Heritage Foundation Defining Child Abuse Protection Act. And there's some model language there that you could help get passed in your state.
And for those of you that listen to the show regularly know that we have 40 family policy councils that employ about 400 full-time employees, have about $60 million a year in revenue. And we are the originators of policy campaigns that we work on to glorify the Lord and advance pro-family, pro-life, pro-American idea constitutionally correct solutions to the problems that we face, and those include saving girls sports. We originated that campaign in 2017. In 2021, we started protecting kids from these radical surgeries as the radical ideology took it to the next level. It was Indiana Family Institute and their 39 peers that stood up to that and overrode governors and have protected kids in nearly half of our country right now. So we're talking with Indiana right now and Josh about what we can be doing, and it's just a blessing to talk to you, Josh, in particular, because you've written a book. And we're talking about citizenship, here. We're talking about what we do as Christians, the conviction that God puts on us. We know the story gives us the bags of gold or the talents, right? And in this case, he's given us the country, in the school district, in the state. We already own all these because it's a democracy. My vote owns it. And 40% of Christians are not participating in that. We are not. We're the one where the master comes back and said, what did you do with your school district if I live in Indiana? Well, I just voted in presidential. Like, you wicked slave. You didn't do anything with it. You, though, advocate, Josh Hershberger, for good citizenship. Tell us about your book and where people can get it and why it's important for Christians to feel that sense of ownership, of stewardship of what God has given us.
Well, as I was sharing with a church over in Terre Haute, Indiana yesterday, as Christians, we're called to follow Jesus in every area of our lives, and I would argue including in our role as citizenship. And I do see citizenship as one aspect of discipleship. We have this remarkable opportunity to engage here. And what I saw was there were a lot of resources out there, but my hope was, could I create something fairly simple? Many listeners may be familiar with Dave Ramsey. He has the baby steps to get to financial freedom. The thought in the book was, what if I could give Christians kind of a Dave Ramsey style guide to citizenship? And I'm grateful that I get to try to live this out every week, and that I'm trying to give folks a good foundation, kind of going over, reviewing our role as citizen, helping Christians see that as a biblical role. But then specifically for our church leaders, having them come up and pray, having them, pray with our governor. Last Wednesday, we had a chance to meet with a group of denominational leaders and our governor and let him know we care about you as a person. We want to lift up your arms as you're standing for truth and justice in our state. And as you build those relationships, as you know, Craig, everything moves at the speed of relationships and politics. You then become a partner in the state. And so our governor has asked us to work on foster care and addiction and mental health. And I joke, look, yeah, we'll be on that by Tuesday. These incredibly complex and interrelated issues. But if you do that well, you're praying with them. They know even if we don't always see eye to eye, we care for you as a minister of God for our good, Romans 13. We're a partner with you in the community to make a difference. And then we get to some of these harder policy issues that may be seen as more controversial. I will tell you now, having done this for 5 years, that relationship building has led to an open or listening ear. So when we bring an issue, and I don't want to go into too many details because of the sensitivity of the relationship, but we had hit a roadblock for a number of years, and pastors building a relationship with a particular person opened the door for a key piece of legislation. And so I don't think we would have gotten there if we didn't start by just praying with them, loving on him, showing, hey, we care about the community, we care about the things you care about. And then it led to, oh, well, tell me a little bit more. Why is that a concern for you? And so it's just like ministry in other spaces. And so the book is just The Good Citizen, a 4-step guide to gospel-centered citizenship. It's available on Amazon, also at goodcitizen.us. We do have a Bible study version with videos. And my hope is that pastors can use that as a resource for their churches as well.
And we want you to check it out because we know that it's disorienting. Some people, many of us, we were on the couch, so to speak, metaphorically. And then at some point we said, you know what, I'm going to get involved in that. And that's what Family Policy Alliance was created to help you with. And We, unlike other organizations where we say we have such a good idea and such good leadership, we think everyone in the country, including Alaska and Hawaii, should know what we're talking about and follow us. We don't do it that way here. We think that there's too much going on for families. There's too many intricacies in policy and in constitutions, and with that blessed state sovereignty that we actually love, the experiments in democracy. So we want to have a family policy council where you live. And we want you to be involved with them where you live and where you pray and where you worship and where you have your business. And so we want you, if you're within the sound of my voice, to sign up for Indiana Family Institute if you live in Indiana. If you don't, we want you to click on the link below, and we want you to find your state organization. If you're good at math like me, and you know that I'm saying we have 40 states and we have 50 in the country, that you know that we are in growth mode and we're trying to get to 50. And if you're in one of those states we don't have, that's why we need a strong FPA. So please support us. And if you're in one of those 10 states and you can help us, please raise your hand. We need you. We'd love for you to join Josh and his crew in Indiana. He already told you he has some of the best ideas that you could possibly be advancing in your state, ready to go for you. And he wants to share it with you. That's the power of our network, is we leverage our work in glorifying the Lord from state to state. And so, Josh, we're celebrating victories. We're in power right now. We're protecting children in a bipartisan way in Indiana. Give us the message on the importance of voting. Tell everybody the importance of voting in more than just the presidential election. I'll let you give the message on that and take us out of here today.
When as I close out, Greg, I did want to just say a special thanks to FPA. I was speaking to a group of principals in Florida recently at a conference, principals from 26 different states. And as you know, and as listeners know, much of kind of educational policy, especially vouchers or how Christian schools are going to be treated, is addressed at the state level. And it was such an encouragement to me to be able to point those principals from 26 different states, hey, if you have an issue, please let me connect you with your state FPC, Family Policy Council. And so I was grateful to be able to share that tool with them, just from across the country. And so certainly the importance of voting, and we believe from Romans 13 that God places those. So there's election, but there's appointment by God. And so we always pray for everyone that's in office. But I can tell you, our Governor Mike Braun, who's our U.S. Senator, came back to serve as our governor. He, out of the gate, was signing executive orders, just like President Trump. We're going to recognize biological reality in our state. He appointed, I just mentioned the Department of Child Services and DCS and the struggles we've had with them. He appointed a new leader of our Department of Child Services who's coming in as an institutional reformer. And he has stated, hey, what happened to the Cox family is not going to happen again. Our new lieutenant governor, as I mentioned, is a pastor. And none of that happened unless Christians showed up to vote. Full stop. None of that happens unless Christians showed up to vote. And so we encourage, right?
And Christians showed up to vote in Indiana because they have a strong and growing Family Policy Council. We want you to support Indiana Family Policy Institute. We want you to follow your Family Policy Council where you live. We thank you for joining us this week. We want to remind you that it's your duty as a steward of the talents, the bags of gold that God has given you to vote probably 4 times every 1 year where you live, not 1 time every 4 years. If they're going to widen the sidewalks, you're supposed to vote on that. If they're going to work on the library, you're supposed to vote on that. Let's participate and let's glorify the Lord as we take back possession of the gift that is the American idea that he's given to us. And with that, it will adjourn this podcast, and we'll see you all soon. Until then, blessings to you all.